What is the TransformPoint method in Unity? This method is used to convert an object's local position into world position. Let's try to understand that through a code that I have for third-person camera movement. This following script is attached to the main camera. It uses two fields, target, of type transform and cam distance of type vector3. You can select the value of target through the inspector since it's a serialized field. The target here is the player object. Next, in the update method, we access this, which is the object this script is attached to, in my case, the camera. So we are accessing the camera's transform component, and through its transform, we are accessing its position. On the right side, we access target's transform and call a method called TransformPoint. The TransformPoint method takes a parameter, cam distance, which is of type vector3. It is also a serialized field, meaning that we define its values through inspector. Here, you can see that I have defined some values for x, y, and z axis. The method will take these values and treat them as their point of origin is the target. In other words, they are in local space of the target. After that, it will convert those values back to world space, meaning that now their origin will be the world instead of the player. Then these final values will be assigned to the camera's position. In the next statement, we are again accessing the camera's transform and calling a method, which is called the lookAt method. It is a really simple method. It forces the object, in my case, the camera, to look at player. So no matter where the player goes, the camera will always point at the player. This topic is a bit complex to comprehend with just this text-to-speech yapping. Let's try to understand things the practical way. As you can see, the camera follows this player wherever it goes. First, the cam distance defines how far the camera is from the player. Its x, y, and z values can be adjusted while the game is running. In most third-person games, the camera is behind the player and a little above the head. You can define these values according to whatever you want. Okay, so this is how the TransformPoint method makes it so that the camera will always follow the player. Assume that the cam distance values were an object in game. I will add a cube. Let me set cam distance values to cube's position since cube position is assumed as cam distance values. Remember, this is just for understanding. Now, during the first frame, when the player object isn't moving at all, the TransformPoint method takes cam distance values, in my case the cube object, and make them a child of player. While they are the child of player, their values are set to whatever you have entered in cam distance. Then, after this, the values, in my case, the cube, is taken out of the player, into the world. In other words, it stops being a child. Now its values will change, since its point of origin is no longer the player, but the world itself. Now these world space position values will be assigned to the camera, and the camera will always stay behind the player when the player isn't moving. Now we will look at what happens to the camera when the player moves. Let me rotate the player object to the right side and explain every single step that happens inside the TransformPoint method. First, the player is rotated. Then TransformPoint method takes its parameter values, in my case, cam distance, and make them a child of player. Here you can see since we assumed cam distance as a cube object, the cube object is made a child of player object. When the cube was not a child of player object, its values were different. When it became a child, its position value are set to cam distance values, and by doing that it starts to copy the rotation of the player but from a distance, and that distance being the cam distance values. As you can see, the cube has rotated to a point that is behind the player. These steps will repeat every frame. When the player is constantly rotating like our planet, the cube object will follow it like the moon. While the player rotates at a fixed point, the camera rotates around it. I have set the camera's position to the current world position of the cube object, and as you can see where the camera will be when the player rotates to the right. Now, you may wonder, why is the camera facing the wall rather than the player object? This is where the lookAt method comes in. See, we are working in the scene editor and the look at method won't execute until we launch the game. But it will be fixed once we launch the game. As you can see, the camera is rotating around the player in a fixed circle. So in conclusion, the TransformPoint method will take a value, make it a child of the object it is attached to and then transform its local space into world space, in other words, change its origin point, from player object to the world. Then it will assign those values back to the position of the camera. If you still didn't get what local or world space is, here's a little info about them. Let's take these two objects, cube and a capsule. I will make cube the parent object and the capsule a child object. I can make any object a child of other object by dragging it on that object. Now, the origin point of child is the parent, rather than the world. Its position will be how far it is from the parent. When we move the parent, the child will move with it, same applies to rotation and scaling. As you can see, when I rotate the cube, the capsule rotates around it like moon rotates around the Earth. This is the exact thing that happens with the player and camera. Now, when I select and move the child object separately, its position will be its distance from the player, since it is in local space of the player object. The origin point of any object is 0, 0, 0 for all the axes. When I set all axes to 0, this means, the child is at its origin point which is the player object. Now, when I take it out of the player object, it stops being a child, and now its point of origin is the Unity world itself rather than the parent it was attached to. Now when I set its values to 0, it will go to the world's point of origin rather than the player's since it is not a child anymore. Every object in Unity which is not a child will have the same point of origin in the world space. Here's a little diagram too, to make things clear. On the left side, we can see how camera follows player and face the exact direction the player is facing. This is due to look at method. Whereas, on the right side, when we don't use look at method, the camera will rotate but won't focus on the player object.